On several occasions, I have heard that love is merely a chemical reaction happening in your brain. Whenever people say this, I have always questioned them. Well, what is a chemical reaction? Many times they end up realizing that they don't really know what a chemical reaction is. Even if we define it, it is not enough to understand a gigantic number of things that happen in the brain. It is unscientific to believe that everything can be understood in that way. It is akin to saying the universe is just a bunch of atoms together. True, but not false. However, it does not serve to understand, but rather to reduce that complexity. Something that seems to disguise itself as scientific understanding. The brain is even more complicated. What may seem as simple as memory actually requires many parts of the brain working simultaneously. It is not uncommon to have these ideas, considering that many people still deeply believe that we only use 10% of our brains, which is true but also false, because in some things we use fewer parts, and in others we use more. This is an excellent point to start talking about how much we ignore about something that is genuinely crucial for humanity and the individual human experience, which is love. Love, far from what one might believe, is not just something that is felt. It is not an emotion as such. It is much, much more. It can range from primitive things like sexual desire to extremely abstract concepts like love for humanity or love for an abstract idea. This topic is not just about giving data, statistics, talking about certain cultures. It is also a sensitive dimension. Hence, there are numerous poems, songs, movies, and stories expressing this strange dimension of love. Talking about this dimension without taking all that into account would be to strip it of its entire human spectrum and its spectrum of personal experience. Because, as I reiterate, it is not just a matter of societies and cultures. It is something that you, the other, and I can feel but not necessarily understand in the same way regarding that feeling. To illustrate the adventures and the strangeness of all this, let me tell you a brief story by Jorge Bucay titled "The Princess is Looking for a Husband." To keep it short, there was a princess who decided to call upon the knights of the kingdom to choose a husband. She asked them to spend 365 days and 365 nights waiting outside her castle. Hundreds of knights arrived, initially all enthusiastic, but as the days, weeks, and months passed, they withdrew one by one. Midway through the year, only one remained waiting outdoors. As the rest of the year passed, the princess became more and more captivated, thinking, "He truly loves me." Initially dressed as a peasant, she passed by and left him some bread. Almost at the end of the year, the princess began organizing the wedding, inviting everyone because only a few days were left. The knight was practically about to get married. However, at the end of the day, 365, the knight went home, thus renouncing the princess's hand. When he arrived home, his mother asked him, "Son, after enduring so much, why have you come back? Why did you give up?" The knight replied, "You know, mother, I found out that she had seen me. I found out that she had chosen me. I found out that she had told her father that she was going to marry me, and despite that, she couldn't spare me a single night of pain, even though she could have. Someone who cannot spare me a single night of suffering does not deserve my love. Right, mother?" This story goes against many Western views of love, views that primarily come from Greek myths, much like many things in the West. However, this type of love, complete submission, is not romantic love. It is something earlier called courtly love, documented since the Middle Ages. In courtly love, a man completely submits to the whims and desires of a woman, practically giving everything, becoming a faithful servant even if the lady does not reciprocate. This led to knights pledging fidelity to a lady, princess, or aristocrat, becoming their protectors. It is popularly understood that more ahead arises romantic love itself that has not stopped being reviled in the last decades. It's essential to note that both romantic and courtly love expect a peculiar, for the time, total submission of the man to the whims and desires of a woman. This has connections to something that comes later. Returning to romantic love, it did not originate in the Romantic era. Anthropologically, very primitive forms of what we call romantic love have been found in other animals, such as penguins. It has also been found in various human cultures. Romantic love is a social construct, but that doesn't diminish its validity. Many things like literature, painting, the society itself are a social construct that arise from the greater development of human organization. Love, and what we consider love, is profoundly affected by culture. Much of our view of love comes from Greece and its myths, which often end in tragedy. This is why Westerners may find it normal for pain to be purer than joy, and for things to usually end badly, as it's the desired scenario. If we dig deeper into the evolutionary and anthropological roots of love, we see different approaches to it. For instance, it's normal for love to develop in a species where babies take a long time to develop and depend heavily on their mothers. Being that in other species sometimes 5 minutes, to sometimes 1 day, sometimes 10 days, are all the offspring need to be able to be independent, at least to a greater extent. That's why appreciate and then consequently love have a strong biological basis linked to how humans develop. Over time, this led, according to Desmond Morris, to attempts to reduce the struggle for a stable sexual partner, making us monogamous in many cultures around the world. This exclusivity of partnership helps mitigate sexual rivalry, preventing many issues that could arise from it. Additionally, humans are quite social, and this has much to do with the deep dependence we have on each other. This dependence of these strong bonds led to the formation of societies, even though a society from 2,000 years ago is very different from a modern one. Human vulnerability, even as they grow, leads to the construction of uteri, small spaces and caves where one can feel freer and safer, and to maintain profound relationships with others. However, it's not all as beautiful as it sounds. Power never ceases to exist. We have been called the political animal, and much of what has to do with love, or rather unions before what we know as marriage, was a highly political matter. In the past, women exchanged between different tribes or peoples as a way to maintain peace or negotiate peace. Often, women didn't have much choice in who would be the father of their children, as emotional relationships were rare and strange. Later comes the concept of courtly love and romantic love, putting the man in a state of submission where love matters more than position and many other things, making a marriage possible. In other words, romantic love played a significant role in the possibility of women fighting for their rights, allowing them to choose a husband. Of course, it did not exempt them from the obligation to get married. Thanks to romantic love, which, while putting women on a pedestal and almost dehumanizing them, would take the first step for them to cease being treated based on their reproductive capacity. In contrast, in cultures with polygamous unions, where love is a contract or a convenience, where one person can have multiple wives, the possession of several wives is seen as a sign of power, prosperity, and wealth. There is also polyamory, which tries to offer a fully romantic alternative in terms of polygamy, although that is a topic for another occasion. So far, we have seen that culture, biology, organizational structure, and even political and economic capabilities have a lot to do with and can greatly influence love. The thing is, love has always been in crisis, but not in that negative view of crisis. Rather, it's a more pragmatic perspective where crisis means having to face many changes in order to continue existing. In the present, Western society is very individualistic. Individualism is one of the issues that not even postmodernity has been able to stop. On the contrary, it has enhanced it. Therefore, today, self-love weighs more than love for the homeland, love for the family, love for the partner, love for the mother, and love for humanity. This creates a clear contradiction in this self-love and love for the other, especially because it is a self-love greatly influenced by a culture of excessive consumption. It leads to this rationalization of consumption where people and everything are seen as something to be bought, as just another product. Relationships are judged based on the pleasure they can provide, the benefits they can offer, and increasingly with greater difficulty for more transcendent matters. On the other hand, we have the case of China, a country we will be hearing a lot about in the coming years. In China, there persists a very materialistic view of love where the suitor has to convince the family of their romantic interest to have a chance. Here, it matters more to have apartments, cars, money, and many other things. In other words, as I mentioned before, culture has a significant influence on what love is and what we consider it to be. In the case of China, it has an openly materialistic stance, and despite efforts to eliminate that dimension, it still persists. It's crucial to understand that discussing romantic love does not imply giving it some type of sacredness, as if it were the only good thing that could happen to a person. In reality, it has some points that no longer fit well with society, although that doesn't mean it can't evolve. Among its major issues is the potential to turn into harassment or forms of psychological violence. In other words, it doesn't mean that one cannot, with enthusiasm, see attracting and captivating someone's attention as a significant challenge. However, it's clear that one must consider the integrity, freedom, and dignity of that person, without falling into induced hallucinations, perhaps triggered by a movie, a book, or mere tradition. On the other hand, there's the advent of the internet, or as some called it, though I wouldn't, the Tinder revolution. Despite this label, I wouldn't call it a revolution, because in reality, it's not very useful. About 60% of people enter these platforms out of boredom. Furthermore, many people have raised complaints about how it doesn't work well for finding a long-term partner and barely functions for casual encounters. There are also dating shows on television that turn the process of getting to know a partner or finding love into a spectacle, which significantly influences societal perceptions of love. Additionally, there's the influence of romantic movies that can distort and transform romantic love, or any other type of love, into various, sometimes harmful interpretations, some of self-destruction and others with ideas of deep dependence. And that word, dependence, is one of the ones that causes the most fear in the individual, the idea that they are tied to someone else, that they cannot be an individual themselves. There's the issue of the documentary of the Swedish theory of love. This theory aimed at making people as independent as possible, resulting in independence but profound loneliness and a lack of meaning. In this case, the renowned sociologist and philosopher, the late Zygmunt Bauman, talks about not seeking dependence nor complete independence, but rather interdependence. A middle ground where two individuals agree and decide to allow someone else to get involved in their affairs in exchange for getting involved in the affairs of the other person. At the point where both can come to depend on each other but by choice, it's more of an artificial dependence because both individuals don't necessarily need each other, but permit it to happen, enabling them to perform as an us. Nowadays, there are many sectors within feminism with diverse perspectives and approaches to the idea of love. Some, for instance, criticize romantic love as the worst thing that can happen to women, viewing it as a chain and a condemnation. Others see it as something positive, while some remain indifferent in their discourse. On the other side, there's the MGTOW, Men Going Their Own Way movement, which aims to escape what they perceive as a sexual marketplace fully dominated by women. They choose isolation and reject the idea of having relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, with any woman. They argue that the balance is completely skewed, with women having all the advantages and choices in matters of relationships. Of course, this is just a brief glimpse of the challenges that love is facing, which can either transform or destroy it, as has happened in the past. To conclude this podcast, I'll share something that you might not be expecting. The idea that love is much, much more. Love is not just the love between partners. Unfortunately, even on Valentine's Day, public discourse often revolves around romantic love, including a more New Age love, where people don't attempt to generate any connection, but still mention that they love each other. But there's much more. There is, obviously, friendship, with significant examples throughout history. There's love for a concept, an idea, something that can lead many people to pursue their ideals, sometimes with catastrophic consequences, and other times with incredible outcomes. For example, there's Carl Sagan, Richard Feynman, and Isaac Asimov, profoundly in love, and with a kind of sparkle in their eyes when talking about the idea of the cosmos and the incredible reality. Here, I want to emphasize the love for humanity, something strange, just like the love for a concept. The reason is that, as mentioned before, love doesn't necessarily originate from within. It can arise from the dimension of ideas with a strong visceral effect. We have vocations like that of Marie Curie, the great scientist who won 2 Nobel Prizes and always emphasized the need to do good for humanity, not for a particular group of people, but for humanity as a whole. It's essential to consider that loving humanity is not like loving a person or a friend, because humanity is not something you can touch or even easily imagine. Clearly, similar to concepts, it usually doesn't reciprocate, doesn't give you a hug back. In the case of humanity, it's even more challenging than a concept because humanity may often kick you, as happened in the case of Marie Curie, who, being a woman, faced not only significant obstacles, but also a denial of many recognitions. Here, I would also like to mention a study called When Light Pierced the Darkness by Neshama Tech, which conducted research in Poland seeking what motivated people to sacrifice themselves for those who were persecuted during the occupation of the Second World War. There was nothing that people didn't risk their lives for, whether they were perfect strangers or rich, had a religion or a certain height. Practically anyone, when they could, gave everything for another person. And so we can continue with numerous examples of anonymous people who, for the love of this abstract concept called humanity, or love for science, the cosmos, knowledge, family, and more, have been participants or sometimes engineers of extraordinary events. But to conclude, what is the love that I have been talking about throughout this podcast? It's a chemical reaction. It's a union of many atoms. It's a feeling. It's a thought. It's an idea. It's a social construct. It is that and much, much more. Some authors have described it as a need or a quest, the longing to try to be more than oneself. It's the act of giving everything and at the same time getting everything. Some see it as a calling to a person, an idea, a group, or a symbol. And so I could go on with both artistic and more scientific, philosophical visions. In the end, I couldn't finish describing what love is because in itself, it is much, much more, both in terms of complexity and intensity. I'm sure that without love, the world would be very, very different. I can't say it would be worse, but it would be a world that those of us who can feel love might view with horror. Love motivates the poet as much as it can motivate the scientist, the philosopher, or the athlete. It can motivate the most beautiful things as well as the most horrible things. To paraphrase Nietzsche somewhat, love goes beyond good and evil, understanding that often those who feel it will not hesitate to break or follow moral rules. To end, I'll leave you with a quote from an author I can't recall. The second best thing after loving and being loved is loving and not being loved. And think about it this way. Love doesn't have to be reciprocated to be real, because all those who have loved humanity, or even a concept, sometimes a friend or a family, probably will never get that reciprocation. It's not so incredible that love can still exist in such circumstances. If you also want to choose a topic for a podcast or a video, you can comment below and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it.